but I'll be seeing you.
Liberace was born Villaggio Valentino Liberace on May 16, 1919. He was known as Walter to his family and Lee to his friends. He was born in West Allis, Wisconsin. His father was Salvatore, or Sam Liberace, who immigrated from central Italy. His mother's name was Frances, and she is believed to have been of Polish descent. Liberace was one of two twins born, but the other child died at birth. Liberace had two brothers and a sister, of which George, his older brother, performed with Liberace frequently. Liberace's father was a musician who played the French horn in bands when he could, but would also work as a laborer or factory worker when musical work was unavailable. In the Liberace household, their father actively encouraged his children to take up playing musical instruments. However, their mother believed that paying for music lessons was an unaffordable luxury. Liberace first played the piano at 4 years old. A true child musical prodigy, by the age of 7, Liberace could both memorize and skillfully play complicated musical pieces. It was during this time that he began to study the techniques of a renowned Polish pianist by the name of Ignacy Jan Paderewski. When Liberace was 8, he actually met Paderewski backstage after he had given a performance at the Pabst Theater in Milwaukee. Liberace once stated that, quote, "I was intoxicated by the joy I got from the great virtuoso's playing. Inspired and fired with ambition, I began to practice with a fervor that made my previous interest look like neglect." Paderewski would later become a family friend and mentor to Liberace. Throughout his childhood, Liberace suffered from a speech impediment, and as a teenager was taunted by his classmates, who made fun of his effeminate manners, as well as his fondness for cooking and playing the piano. Liberace drew further into his piano playing, guided by Florence Kelly, who was his teacher for over 10 years. It is during this time period that he gained experience in playing popular music in theaters, on radio, as well as dance classes and weddings. In 1934, he played jazz piano with a school group called the Mixers. Liberace also performed during the Depression in cabarets and strip clubs. Although his parents did not approve of Liberace working at these venues, he was also bringing a steady income into the household at a time when it was sorely needed. During the same time period, Liberace adopted the stage name of Walter Busterkeys to create a degree of separation between the classically trained musician and the strip club pianist. In 1937, Liberace was a participant in a formal classical music competition. It was noted at the time that his performance had a flair with showmanship qualities to it. In 1939, at the end of a classical concert in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Liberace played his first requested encore piece, the popular comedy song Three Little Fishies.
Fishy too swims, and the mama fishy swim if he can, and they swam right over the dam.
In 1940, at 20 years old, he played with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra at the Pabst Theater in Milwaukee. During the World War II years, Liberace moved away from strict classical performances and modified his act to include, as he would say, pop with a bit of classics, or classical music with the boring parts left out. Although he did not meet with much success with his early trips to New York City in the early 40s, during the mid to late 40s, he was performing in nightclubs around the U.S. and was quickly gaining national exposure as a result of his contracts with both the Statler and Radisson hotel chains. It is during this period that he largely abandons classical music, opting to concentrate on being an entertainer and showman. It is also during this time that he significantly increases his direct interaction with his audience, from taking requests to talking with his audience, making jokes, and even occasionally calling someone on stage and giving them a quick piano lesson. This was truly the foundation of Liberace's stage persona that would serve him well during the coming years.
Here's the same thing in double time.
In 1943, Liberace began to appear in soundies, which were an early form of a music video. He used two of his songs from his nightclub act, Tiger Rag and 12th Street Rag. In these soundies, he was billed as Walter Liberace. A year later, in 1944, Liberace would make his first appearance in Las Vegas, which would become his principal location for the remainder of his career. Also during the late 1940s, Liberace worked hard to further refine his stage performance. It is during this time that he adds the candelabra to all of his performances, being inspired to use it as the result of a similar prop used in the Chopin biopic, A Song to Remember in 1945. This is also when he adopts the mononym Liberace. Another element of Liberace's stage performance to receive attention was in the outfits that he wore on stage. He realized that the entire band wearing matching black tuxedos would do nothing to help him stand out, and as a result, the first unique costuming choice that Liberace made was to wear an entirely white tuxedo. By 1947, he was being billed as Liberace, the most amazing piano virtuoso of the present day. To match his growing stage presence, Liberace purchased an oversized, gold-leafed Bluthner grand piano. This was the first of many unique pianos that he would use on stage. In 1947, Liberace moves to North Hollywood and was a regular performer at such clubs as Ciro's and the Macombo, and would perform for stars such as Shirley Temple, Gloria Swanson, and Clark Gable. He was at the time still primarily an intermission act on the supper club circuit and was determined to reach an ever larger audience. It is as a result of this desire that Liberace first begins to experiment with slightly more extravagant costumes, with his Las Vegas act becoming more firmly entrenched. By the early 1950s, Liberace was commanding premium prices for performances. In 1954, his performance at Madison Square Garden earned him a record-breaking $138,000, which is equivalent to a little more than $1.5 million today. A year later, in 1955, he was making $50,000 per week at the Riviera in Las Vegas. In March of 1956, Liberace guest stars on You Bet Your Life with Groucho Marx, which shows how popular Liberace had become at this time.
My name is Liberace.
Oh, Liberace. Well, give me 5.
Hello, Groucho.
Not everyone was appreciative of Liberace's stage performances, and especially his piano playing. Most music critics of the day were at best disinterested and more often actively hostile toward Liberace's playing technique, frequently observing that he demonstrated a lack of appreciation for the great composers, to calling into question his playing technique. Liberace once said, "I don't give concerts, I put on a show." As opposed to most classical concerts with subdued clapping and a quiet exit, Liberace would invite as many people as could fit on stage after the performance to shake hands, hug, and talk with. It was this fundamental difference in how Liberace viewed and interacted with his audience that would set him apart. In the pre-television years, Liberace never showed much interest in being a radio performer, as he felt that the show's visual element was an absolutely essential part of the overall performance. Liberace's earliest guest appearances on shows such as Dumont's Cavalcade of Stars with Jackie Gleason and The Kate Smith Show left him feeling disappointed and uncertain about future guest appearances, owing to what he felt were extremely fast-switching camera shots and short duration of the interview. Ever the visual showman, this prompted Liberace to put together his own television show where he would have absolute control of all the production elements. His first show on a local television station in Los Angeles was extremely popular and earned the highest ratings of any local show to date. This in turn led to the Liberace show being picked up as a summer replacement for the Dinah Shore show. The 15-minute Liberace show began on July 1st, 1952, but was not picked up as a regular network series. Duke Goldstone used a film version of Liberace's local television show and sold it into syndication to many local television stations. As a result of the syndication of the Liberace show, he earned over $7 million over its first 2 years in syndication. Despite normal family friction across the years, Liberace understood the value in having his family be a visual component of his shows. His brother George was oftentimes the conductor and would additionally play violin solos, while his mother was strategically placed in the middle of the front row, and Rudy and Angela, his brother and sister, were frequently mentioned on air, although they were not otherwise actively involved. At the end of all of Liberace's performances, he would sing "I'll Be Seeing You," which became his theme song.
But I'll be seeing you.
After the Liberace show ended in 1956, Liberace gave his first international performance playing in Havana, Cuba. He followed that up with a European tour later that same year. In 1960, Liberace performed at the London Palladium with Nat King Cole and Sammy Davis Jr. This was also the first televised command performance where a show occurs at the request of the monarch, where Queen Elizabeth II was present for this performance. In the early 60s, Liberace had seen a decline in his U.S. popularity while he had been touring overseas. To remedy this, Liberace began making appearances in small-town supper clubs, as well as very skillfully selected television and promotional appearances. Over time, this had the desired effect and re-established Liberace as a top-tier entertainer. After an accident involving inhaling dry cleaning chemical fumes nearly claimed his life, Liberace would come back from that event with a renewed energy and focus on his performances, including such things as wearing huge rings on his fingers and exotic costumes, as well as being driven on stage in a Rolls Royce. As a result of this, Liberace further refines his stage act, adding more dazzling costumes and effects. And it is during this time that he earns the title of Mr. Showmanship. It is also during this time that he introduces a young Barbra Streisand as one of his opening acts for a show. Liberace's television appearances in the mid to late 1960s include a cameo on The Monkees, as well as playing a dual role in 2 episodes of Batman that were reported to be the 2 highest rated of the series. Subsequent television appearances throughout the 70s and 80s included Here's Lucy, Kojak, and The Muppet Show, as well as appearing on an episode of Saturday Night Live, and in 1985 appearing as the guest timekeeper for the first WrestleMania main event. In late 1986, with HIV advancing, Liberace gave one final series of performances at Radio City Music Hall in New York. And his final television appearance was a Christmas Day interview with Oprah Winfrey. Owing to the time that Liberace lived, he could never be open about his sexuality. The libel suits which Liberace won inadvertently put him in a very delicate position, as in both cases and under oath, he stated in no uncertain terms that he was not a gay man when in fact he was. Liberace died in Palm Springs, California on February 4th, 1987. At no time did Liberace ever publicly disclose his sexual preference. However, the coroner of Riverside County decided to intercept the body on its way to LA to be interred and had it returned to Riverside County so he could perform an autopsy. The coroner held a press conference February 10th where he announced that Liberace had died of HIV. One of Liberace's lasting legacies was through an endowment of the majority of his estate to the Liberace Foundation, which awarded scholarships to high school students who had musical ability but couldn't afford to go to music school. This endowment lasted through 2011.